Um, so I'm going to begin. So, Miahue, Nenetu Sean Milanovich. Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Milanovich. Nehen Sahina. I am from the Agua Caliente reservation, and I am an enrolled member of the Agua Caliente band of Cahuilla Indians, but I have a lot of native blood from Southern California in my veins, and I'm also got some Scottish, English, and Irish as well. And but you know, I want to say that the Treaty of Temecula, this is a story of invasion, deceit, stolen land, and the persistence of power. And I give dates 1846 to 1905, because in 1846, that's when the United States invaded indigenous California, invaded Cahuilla lands, Cumia lands, Serrano lands, Cupeño lands, Pancowichum lands. And that was a threat to our way of life, our living. But it wasn't until 1905, after the initial invasion, when treaties were conducted. In 1905, some very important documents resurfaced, and we're going to talk about that towards the end. But I say this is very important, the Treaty of Temecula. It's only one of two treaties that were created down in Southern California. The other treaty is the Treaty of San Isabel that was conducted on the San Isabel reservation just 2 days after the Treaty of Temecula. Another reason I want to talk about is, you know, I'm planning my research. I had learned that not all of our tribal members, some of our tribal elders had known about this treaty. And so I thought it was extremely important to learn about it. And so with that, I am going to go ahead and start. And, you know, I was taught to open up our meetings with a presentation or with a prayer. And so I'm going to start with a bird song. And I have here a rattle that you can all see. And our bird songs go back since the very beginning of time. They're thousands and thousands of years old, maybe even longer. But, you know, the song I want to sing to you talks about the village of Temecula, talks about the town. And, you know, the story is it's in our bird songs. It's talking about as the people travel through the area. And yeah, so here we go. Yahoo Kimaya Wene, 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 Yahoo Yahoo, Timayo, well, Yahoo, Timayo, well, Yahoo, Timayo, well, Emaku, well, Emaku, well, Itemaku, Timayo, well, Yahoo, 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 Timayo, well, Emaku, well, Emaku, well, Itemaku, Timayo, well, Yahoo, Timayo, well, Yahoo, Timayo, well, Yahoo, Timayo, well, Yahoo, Timayo, well. Uh-huh, Achima, Achima. It's all good. It's all good. So I have a question for you. Did it come through the whole time? Okay, awesome. Yeah, because we've been on some other Zooms and sometimes it always doesn't come through. So just curious. So thank you. So here's a picture right here with the 4 different directions of our tribal lands. And you know, we have pictures from the river, from the ocean, from the canyons and the San Jacinto Mountains, and to the and into the mountains. But the bones of our ancestors are everywhere, from the ocean to the mountains to the desert and to the river. And for me, that's real important. I grew up hearing stories that we occupied all of the land as far as you can see. Wherever there was rocks, wherever there were trees or plants, that's where the indigenous people walked, lived on, and made a home, gathered, collected from there, swam. And so, I mean, this country, this land, it's not wilderness. It's been inhabited and occupied for millennia. And our people have always been here. But for the sake of our meeting, of our topic tonight, which is the Treaty of Temecula, we're going to be talking. So this is a map of Southern California, but we're really talking about the bottom portion that involves the Quezon, the Kumeyaay, Luiseño, Cahuilla, Cupeño, Serrano, Tongva, Juaneño, all of these tribes in this area. There was a lot of tribes that were that are here on this map that were not included in any treaty negotiations. And treaties, treaties were not for peace. Maybe in the very beginning, treaties were for peace, but by the time the United States government had reached California, treaties were not used for peace and settlement. They were used to extract the land, to extract the resources from the indigenous people. An auntie of mine, Carmen Lucas, she's Quimey. She lives up in the mountains there in San Diego. And she says, our ancestors have told us we have always been here. And as my father said, we have been here since time immemorial. We have been here since the very beginning of time. And so for us, as Native people, as traditional people of this land, this land is we really hold this land in high regards, and we believe that upon us and coming together as a people, as a nation, creator, that's what we call him, creator, gave us this land and told us to watch over the land, to be the caretakers, to watch over the animals, the fish, and the plants, and the trees, the ocean. And so we do that. Wherever we're at, we always want to be a part of it, set up, because we believe that this is our land and it's our responsibility to take care of it. For for the Treaty of Temecula, we are really talking about a certain group of people. We're talking about the Cahuilla. We're talking about the Cupeño, the Luceño, and the Serrano. And the Cahuilla, in their language, say Iviatem, Iviatem. Can you say that? Iviatem. That means Cahuilla speaking people. The Cupeño people are the Cupangawichum. Luceño are the Payom Cowichum. And the Serrano are the Marayam. So these are their tribal names. But one of our elders from the Agua Caliente band of Cahuilla Indians, Francisco Potencio, once said, he said that we are the fifth people. We're people of the fifth people. We're the descendants of the fifth people. And what does that mean? We says it right here. We settled permanently. We had permanent villages. Because we had permanent villages, we had our own cemeteries. We had cemeteries that were fenced in, and they were properly managed and taken care of. The people had lush gardens. Lush gardens. We were farmers. And sometimes those gardens, they were gardens that were naturally out on the land, and we managed the land, we manipulated the land so that we could have a bountiful crop. And we made sure that animals kept away some of these. And sometimes we had gardens where we brought in different vegetables and different fruits and planted them to be there with us, to use it, to feed our bodies. And the fruits and vegetables are extremely important to the Cahuilla people. And for the Cahuilla people, it goes back to our creation story about our creator, Umna. And we believe that when we're eating fruits and vegetables, we're eating, well, let me just say, I have this next line that says, people use ceremonial houses for prayer and organized events. Ceremonial house, that goes along with religion. We had a beautiful religion. We still have a beautiful religion. And our creator spared nothing for us. Our creator wanted the very best for us. There was lots of love, lots of emotion, and we were supposed to respect and honor one another, our brothers, our sisters. We were not supposed to take any lives, or we were not supposed to rape, kill, maim. And our whole life structure was built upon this. And there's this thing called natural law, and we were supposed to respect natural law. In Cahuilla, it is called Naminkiwet, and it's really about relationships with the natural environment, with one another. And we need to, it's really about supporting and helping one another. We also had our traditional lands that were owned, they were managed, they were hunted and gathered from. And so from our lands, you had your own lands to take from. You wouldn't go into other people's lands, not even to cross it without permission. So the people obeyed this natural law, Temecula way. They obeyed one another because on their lands, there was enough food. There was enough resources to take care of you, your community, and all the different clans that were around you. So for the Treaty of Temecula, the tribes that were really involved, there was 5 tribes or 5 groups of people. You have the Kumeyaay, and the Kumeyaay were at the southern border, and they are our relatives too, but they come from a different line. But with the other lines, we have the Serrano, Luceño, Upeño, and Cahuilla, and we're all together. We all come from the same family line. Our languages are real similar. With the Kumeyaay, our language is not that similar, but our life ways, our beliefs, our stories, the landscapes were the same. We all traded with one another. Out on the landscape, there was trade routes and trails up and down California, from the Sierra Mountains all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And most of the time, trails led to water sources. Sometimes the trails led to villages. There's some major trade routes that go from Palm Springs area, and if you follow the 10 freeway and you take it all the way out to the Colorado River, that was a major trade route that the people used to take. And it would, at one end, it took you to the Colorado River. The other end, it takes you to the Pacific Ocean, which is behind me. But you see this picture here. This is a trail heading, let's see, northeast, and it's coming out of Corn Springs along the I-10 freeway out by Desert Center, out by the 177, and this trail heads straight to the McCoy Mountains, and it's about a 17-mile shot, but you can follow this trail all the way to the McCoy Mountains, and then from there the trail would come back around. And what this trail is doing, even though it's pretty much going from west to east or east to west, it's stopping at all the natural springs for the people to get water at. And at a lot of these springs out in the desert, you see on the left-hand side, here's some petroglyphs that are on the rock. This is these ancient writings. And we don't know what all these ancient writings are or rock art, but they're descriptions of the area. And sometimes they're maps of what's going on. For that trail that we saw previously, if we just turn it around and look the other way, here it is going the other way, heading west into the Corn Springs, where there's hundreds of rock art panels on both sides of the canyon. Just absolutely phenomenal. This picture on the right here, this is a picture of California, and these are some of the trails that you see all throughout California. And this is just a small number, but there was trails that started at the Pacific Ocean, went all the way to the Colorado River and beyond. And then there was trails that went up into Canada, and trails that went all the way down into Central America, maybe even South America. We know our people all along the coast right here on the Pacific coast. You think they just stopped here at the ocean? No, they kept their trails going by boats. They had boats that could take them all the way out into the ocean to Hawaii and beyond. That's something that is not written too much about, but our people down in the south, the Kumeyaay and the Tongva, they made these journeys to Hawaii and beyond. And there's stories with some of the elders will tell you. And hopefully we can share some of those stories with you sometime. Some of the staple foods at the top with the yellow beans, that's menyakish or creosote. On the left, this cactus, this is a mule. On the bottom here, we have the acorns or quinulum. And then on the right, we have pine nuts or from the pine cones, tevatem. So these four groups, these are the main foods that our people ate that were completely dependent on in their life zones. And some life zones, you could gather all four of these. Other life zones, it was two or three. So pretty lucky out here in the desert, out here in the mountains. You know, whether you're in the Coachella Valley, San Jacinto Mountains, Santa Rosa Mountains, down in San Diego, an abundance of food here in Southern California. And here's a picture of my family. And these are the traditional gardens I was telling you about. Here on the left, we're picking pine cones, my wife and my daughter. On the top right, we have some men. We're gathering agave. These long poles right here. You know, these are the this is some of the agave, the tops of the agave. On the bottom here, where my niece, she's picking the buds from the yucca, or she's picking yucca blossoms. Then down on the bottom, this is in Coyote Canyon, and where there is just miles and miles, acres, hundreds of acres of agave. And this is extremely abundant food right here. This here, my father was Chairman Richard Milanovich. He was chairman of our tribe for over 30 years. My father, he was tribal chairman of the Agua Caliente band of Cahuilla Indians. And the reason I want to share this with you is when my father died, we had singers come to sing him home, to sing him on his journey to heaven, which we call Telmekish. And as I said, we have beautiful ceremonies, and our Creator loved us deeply. And there's a lot of the books and early ethnographies that just completely discredit that we were heathens, that we did not believe in God. But these traditions, these ceremonies where we sing over our loved ones all night long, tell us otherwise. And these songs that they send the person home on a special journey. But when the people from Pachanga came to sing for Dad, they used this medicine here, the humquat, and with some water, and we sang over it all night long, and we blessed that water, and we were able to use that water to bless ourselves. But these traditions are thousands of years old, and we hold them deeply to our hearts. And I really wanted to share that with you. Now we're going to get into the dirty part of it. So the invasion periods, there was three invasions: the Spanish invasion, Mexican invasion, and the American invasion. But we're going to focus on the American invasion tonight, which was started you know, if you're really counting, you know, with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo with Mexico, we're counting from starting in 1848 to the present. But You know, the invasion started back in 1769 with the Spanish invasion. And Mexican invasion started in 1821. But you see those cuffs right here? Those were for children, indigenous children held in the missions so that they wouldn't run away. The missions kept the children there locked up so they could not get away. This picture on the left up here is a recording. You have to look at it real good, but it's a paddle wheel boat. And there's a paddle wheel here. And here's a long boat. And there's another paddle wheel at this end. And then there's people standing up. And there's one of the men on the left side is holding up a flag with the United States. So this is a map of the Western United States. This map was made in 1858 by I forget who made it. It's one of the Mormons made this map, but it shows the route that the Mormons took and most other people took. And the route that the people took, which to get here, they followed the Gila River down at the bottom, above the word Alta, the Gila River that runs east-west. So it starts from the east, goes all the way to the west, towards the bottom of California, over by Yuma, down over by Warner Springs, and that through Temecula, and then on up. But this was the route that people took. So for us as Native people, traditional people, even though this was indigenous territory, we didn't, you know, we were checking everyone who was coming into our lands. You, like I said, you could just not leave your territory and go into someone else's territory. So we were checking on everyone. We were asking for their papers, their driver's license, their passports. And if they didn't have it, if they didn't have the correct paperwork, we told them they had to leave. And that happened a lot. But for a lot of the people, they were courteous in the beginning, and there was bargains. There was some trading going on. This picture right here, Freeman, he did this picture right here. So upon the arrival with all the American invaders, death, there was violence on the land. And so I want to say my ancestors fought tirelessly against attack and invasion so we could be here today. But the blood stained the earth that we were on. There was a lot of violence, and it went back and forth. And it was ugly. There was genocide. The United States is built on invasion, military control, and agreements with tribal nations and European nations. There was 5 treaties, you know, that are the that made up the policy with Native American people. And these treaties are Fort Pitt Treaty, Fort Stanwix, Fort McIntosh, and Treaty of Hopewell. These treaties right here, they set the parameters on which way the United States would follow. And so these treaties created the precedent that tribes fell under the protection of the United States. You keep hearing that. You hear that in the movies. You hear that in the written records. Protection of the United States. The United States did not offer us protection. Within a short period of time, the United States used treaties to acquire lands belonging to tribes, which were really independent sovereign nations, and to reduce authority of American Indian nations. That's what the treaties did, to reduce the authority of the tribes themselves. Tribes signed the treaties and relinquished lands under duress, under threat. And the United States used treaties to deal with land cessions, commerce, Indian trade, and to create the so-called peace and friendship treaties. But agreements and treaties, these are not new to the indigenous people of Southern California. We have had oral agreements for as long as we've been here. We had to. And oral agreements were necessary at times to control people, to help people to get along with one another. There was the treaty that the Cahuilla had with the Tongva people over in the LA basin. And well, it wasn't a treaty, it was an oral agreement. And the agreement was that we could come onto their lands and gather acorns that were unmarked. Well, that were specifically marked for us. If they had a line through it, we could gather from those trees. If they did not have a line, we were not able to. And so if we started collecting acorns from those trees, unmarked trees, that meant war, that meant a threat. And so it was passed down from each generation not to harvest from plants, from trees that you did not have permission to. The treaties came to California in 1851 and 1852. And in total, 18 treaties were crafted and created. So there's, here in the United States, there's 5 treaty periods. You have sovereignty and trade. So in the very beginning, treaties were conducted with tribal nations to create and build a relationship with, and have trade. And the United States government at that time said no one can trade with tribal nations unless they have a permit from the United States or the United States. And so in the very beginning, treaties were extremely important. Later on, after the United States grew, had more people, a lot more ammunition and threats, such as gunpowder with the technology, the government started making treaties and removing people from their traditional lands and relocating them west of the Mississippi River into Indian territory known as Oklahoma. In 1851, 1852, that's when the treaties of California were created. In 1854 to 1865, there were treaties in the West that were made, treaties for allotment. So you could get 160 acres. Tribal members would get 80 acres, maybe even 40 acres of land. In 1871, the United States had its bill. The United States said it no longer needed permission to ask the indigenous people. It no longer wanted to recognize them for who they are. And so the United States stopped conducting treaty councils with the indigenous people of the United States. So all of these treaties, there's ratified treaties, treaties that were approved by the Senate, and treaties that were unratified by the United States Senate. The treaties of California are unratified. So upon the night of the American military invasion under Manifest Destiny, that's what it was called, Manifest Destiny, under President Polk. It was Captain William Mervine. He came into San Diego on a ship. He left San Francisco 1846 and occupied San Diego in July 1846. A couple months later, 6 months later, well, 5 months here, it was General Stephen Watts Kearny came into California. He marched to California with just like 125 men. They crossed the Colorado River. They got through, they burned down the village of San Felipe, the Kumeyaay village. Then they get to Warner Springs, which is the actual village of Kupa. And there, you know, they freshened up, they bought some meat, the women made them some food, and then they marched to San Isabel and San Pascual. And in the middle of the month, they had their first battle with the Mexican military forces. But in that battle, Kumeyaay forces were there as well. Just 1 month later, January, you have General George Cook, General Philip St. George Cook. And he had followed with the Mormon battalion. He came in with a couple hundred men, with a couple hundred Mormons to help fight in the war with Mexico. And then it was in April 1847, under Stevenson, Colonel Jonathan Stephen, he had over 1,000 men that arrived in California to take California from Mexican forces, from indigenous forces. And then it was in November 1850 that General Samuel Peter Heinzelman arrived in California at the Colorado River and later Coyote Canyon. The American invasion, after the American military invasion, which opened up a road, it opened up an area for miners, trappers, ranchers, politicians, opportunists, soldiers, adventurers to come to California. And they came with this idea that they have the God-given right to take the land from the indigenous people. It was horrible. There was military governors at the time. And even after the military governors, when California became a state, permits were needed for indigenous people. Indigenous people to go from village to village needed a permit. They no longer could walk freely to go visit their neighbors, to go gather acorns. They had to get a permit. And this was enforced by the California militia. The militia came in and slaughtered thousands and thousands of people, indigenous people that were in the way. When gold was found in 1848, 1849, complete chaos in California, complete chaos. And right away, California became a state. On September 9th, 1850, California became a state. And Peter Burnett, he was the first governor of California. And in his inaugural speech, this is what he said: that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected. While we cannot anticipate this result, but with painful regret, the inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power or wisdom of man to avert. This was the thinking of the white men at the time. Horrible. And for my ancestors to understand this is genocide right here. This is what most people believe. All the invaders. So this was the mindset of the invaders that were coming into this land. So if they saw an invader, if they saw a indigenous family, indigenous man, they told that person to get out of the way. If they did not get out of the way, they were killed instantly. There was no thought about it. You know, along with this, right before California became a state, there was these debates in in the capital in Sacramento at the time, and they were debating if American Indians, the indigenous people of California, should be, well, or if California would allow slavery. That included African Americans, that included Native Americans. And fortunately, California voted not to allow slavery. But what it did do, it set this law that allowed the government to control Native people, to take possession of children, to demand that they go to a court of law. If and most of the time, nobody believed what an Indian said. Nobody believed him. It was the white man's word over the Indian. And things were really bad. Indigenous people lost their land. They were dispossessed from their traditional family lands that they had occupied for thousands and thousands of years. And they did not go freely. No, they put up a fight, a real good fight. And we know that. After a couple years, there was the idea to civilize the indigenous people or to exterminate them. The policy of removal, except under peculiar circumstances, must necessarily be abandoned. And only alternatives left are to civilize or exterminate them. This is the Secretary of the Interior saying this, Alexander H.H. Stewart. To civilize or exterminate them. Those were the only options for indigenous people. And nobody wanted to civilize the indigenous people. And what does civilized mean? We were civilized. We could count. We had our own writing system. We knew the stars. We could travel. We had a beautiful God. And that God taught us to value human lives and to give whatever we had. So as the invaders were coming in, we were teaching them where the food was at, where the animals were at, so that they could eat. We taught them how to prepare the food. We taught them how to build the houses. We taught them where to find the wood at to build their churches. This law that I was talking to you about, an act for the government and protection of Indians. This is the law that put California was the only state in the United States that had this law. And so it was a law to make sure that the Native people would not move anywhere, that they were not protected. No, not at all. But they were completely harassed. And if they did something wrong, they were forced to work in the fields. And then when they got out, a highest bidder, because the indigenous people didn't have the money to pay their fine, so someone would bid for them to get them out, and then they would become the property of that person and work on their fields for a number of weeks or whatever it was they wanted done. And they just kept getting stuck in the circle, and they could not get out. But all these interactions, this violence, this sinking, it started to lead to treaties, these peace and friendship treaties. That's what they wanted, because the indigenous people were getting tired of all this invasion. The white people were tired of the attacks from the indigenous people. So the Treaty Commission was conspired in 1850, and there was 3 men, and they became treaty commissioners, and their goal was to gain legal title of the land occupied by the indigenous people of California. The United States set out to make contracts organized by force. None of these treaties were done with any reciprocal relationship. No, it was under duress, under threat, under gun. And Adam Johnson, he became the first subagent here in California, up in the San Francisco area. But it was in 1850, Congress set aside $25,000 to make treaties with tribes. And they had Redhawk McKee, George Barber, excuse me, and Oliver M. Wozencraft. And Oliver M. Wozencraft, he was already in California. He was a medical doctor, and he had traveled across the country, but he was in California at the time because he wanted gold. He was trying to make a fortune in gold. But the idea was to find three men, three highly intelligent men that knew nothing about the indigenous people of California, nothing at all, not what they ate, nothing about their language or who were the chiefs. And so they found these three men, very highly intelligent men, but who had zero knowledge of the indigenous people. And so they set out together in 1851 to make treaties. And the first treaty was made at Camp Fremont. And this is right above San Francisco. And this is up in the mountains. And there was a lot of violence going on in the mountains with all the invaders. There was a lot of people coming into Northern California. And so the indigenous people were attacking all the invaders, and the invaders were just sniping out all the indigenous people. And this first treaty was done in March. The second treaty in April here. So now we're going to get down into Southern California. And so I want to talk about Cahuilla Chief Juan Antonio. And when the United States came into California, one of the tactics used was to pit the native people against one another. And this is one of the main people right here, Juan Antonio. The other person is Antonio Gara, and he was Cupeño. But Juan Antonio, his tribal name is Cuswutna. And Cuswutna, he was baptized as Juan Antonio in 1828 at Mission San Luis Rey. And Juan Antonio at the time had been living up in the mountains, and he had been taken captive and forced to go to the mission. He wasn't for Juan Antonio. He was raised and he was bred and he was groomed to be a liaison to the American invaders. His elders wanted him to learn as much as he could about the American people, because there was a lot of things that they did good and there was a lot of things that were bad, but he was there to find out whatever he could to bring it back to his community. And he was baptized at Mission San Luis Rey. Juan Antonio, he belonged to the Cuswutna clan, and the village, it was called Cuswutna, and that name has been Americanized to Costo. So Juan Antonio Costo. But Juan Antonio, he was a businessman. He was a rancher. He had thousands of head of cattle up in the mountains, up in the valleys, out in the desert. And these are his branding irons that he has. And these branding irons are inside the Riverside Metropolitan Museum's collections right here. The other person I was talking to you about was Antonio Gara. Antonio Gara is Cupeño, and his traditional name was Chungalangish. So Chungalangish Cabal was baptized as Antonio Chungalangish. And Gara, so for our purposes, I want to state his name as, so I'm Antonio Chalangangesh. I want to refer to him as Antonio Gara from this point on. So Gara belonged to the Cahuilla lineage, and that's a traditional family name. If you go to his to the cemetery in Old Town San Diego, that has that name on there, Cabal. He was Cupeño from the village of Cupa. This is the village, the old village right here. And so if you look on the far right, whoops, on this far right corner, you see that adobe building. This is where my grandmother lived. My grandmother she lived right there. She was from Cupa, and bless her soul. And then the hot spring from Cupa was just right down on the other side right there. So this is just a general map, so you all can get a good reference of the territory that we're in. But roughly, we're talking from Riverside, all the way down towards Oceanside, down to the Mission over here, out to the mountains over here, to the base of the San Jacinto, Santa Rosa Mountains, right here on this side right here. So this is all the territory that we're looking at. So it started in 1850 and with Antonio Gara. The people in San Diego, they wanted money for their schemes. They started taxing people to make some money, to make some improvements in the city. But the city started taxing the indigenous people. And under the United States law, Native Americans could not be taxed. They were not even considered, what do you call it? They were not citizens of the United States, so they could not be taxed. But Sheriff Harasi started enforcing the taxing. And so that started in 1851, excuse me, 1850, with $600. The second year, and it wasn't only Cupeño people, there was Kumeyaay that were being taxed. There was Luiseño, Payancowichon people that were being taxed. And the indigenous people that were being taxed, they were the ones that had been to the missions. So all of these villages that had prior missionization, they were the ones that were being taxed. And that was BS. They should not have been taxed. And so the Native people were very upset about it. In 1852, Antonio Gara was taxed again. He was taxed again, and he couldn't come up with all the money. But they were putting pressure on him to pay everything, and they sent troops out to his land. They confiscated some of his cattle. And he started getting this idea, well, he needs to start changing things, because things were just not working out. All his relatives were dying. So Americans could have a home, could have a ranch. And some of you might know that under the Mexican government, under the Spanish government, large swaths of land were given out to people. We're talking 23,000 acres, 8,500 acres, 17,000 acres. These are large tracts of land that are indigenous land, and their land was being taken away slowly, and the tribes saw that, and so they started talking, and they wanted to stop it. So Antonio Gara, he met with Juan Antonio, and he said, hey, will you help me? Let's stop the Americans. Let's eradicate them from our lands. But Juan Antonio, he did not like it that the Americans had come onto his land either, but he was perplexed, and he didn't want to lose people. The Americans had a lot of technology. They had guns, they had cannons, and his people they couldn't face that. So he was looking at that, and but he did offer up 300 people, warriors. But Juan Antonio, he said he's just kind of set it out right now. But Antonio Gara, he went to the Colorado River to start bringing awareness of this revolt. And he had sent people to the north, to the south, to the east, and the people along the coast in LA area. They were going to Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, San Diego, and on the river. And on the Colorado River is where most of the people coming into California were coming from, down in the Yuma area. So Antonio Gara went to the river, and he was talking with the people over there, and they had happened to there was these sheep herders that were bringing sheep up, and they stopped them. They confiscated their 1,500 head of sheep, and this started a really bad thing. And so the Quezon people, the native people along the river, they started fighting amongst themselves. And in the meantime, Antonio Gara, he started talking to them about the war, and they were all gung-ho, and they had just taken all these sheep, and they were ready. They were ready to jump on the bandwagon. So Antonio Gara comes back this way, and he goes to Coyote Canyon, and which is it's like 60 miles from the Colorado River. And so he gets into Coyote Canyon, and this is just on the other side of where he lives. And when he's there, the people there in Coyote Canyon, it's home of the Cahuilla people. They're all riled up, and they're ready for war. The people were making arrows, they were making bows. The women had been making stew, they were making venison. They were making pouches, and they were painting themselves mentally, spiritually, and physically, getting ready for war. They were going to take on the American people there in Southern California. And they were going to start with all the ranches and then move into the cities. And so there was hundreds of people in Coyote Canyon, hundreds. But what had happened with these, when the treaty commissioners, they had split up months ago, and one of them came down into Southern California, Oliver Wozencraft. And Oliver Wozencraft, when he came into San Diego, he met up with Peter Heinzelman, and with Lieutenant Heinzelman. And Lieutenant Heinzelman said, "I will take you to where all to the front lines. I know where the people might be hiding at." So Heinzelman, he already had a squad of 100 plus people with him. And then with Oliver Wozencraft, the treaty commissioner, there was like 60 people with him, 60 soldiers. So they went to Coyote Canyon from there in the Anza Borrego Desert. And they split up. One group came from the top, and another group came from the south. And it was at dawn on Christmas morning. Well, just 2 days before Christmas morning, they came in and they started attacking. They had walked up the canyon, and they just started killing everyone that they saw. The people started running, so they became easy targets, and they were just shot down like rabbits with the rifles of the soldiers. It was a massacre. And so after the massacre, things kind of settled down a little bit for the Americans anyway. The they held a military tribunal because they called in all the people that had been a part of the Antonio Gara revolt. And there was 4 leaders that they found. And they found those 4 leaders guilty as charged, and they had to dig their own graves. And then they were shot in the head. Each person that was shot had a party of a shooting party of 5 people. And so they were killed. Each had received 5 shots in the head, in their cranium. And their graves are still there today. They're markers, but it's here in Coyote Canyon in Anza Borrego, and near one of the villages where the people were at. And when you if you remember my background with in the desert with all the agave behind me, that was on the upper levels of the canyon. But when you drop down into where the wash is, this is what it looks like right here. This picture that you see right here. Very lush in some places, lots of trees, lots of willow, cottonwoods, and palms. There's lots of mesquite, lots of agave. There's pinyon there, lots of food. And after this massacre, it was Oliver Wozencraft. He told all the people, things are going to change. Things are going to change. Oh, sorry about this. But Juan Antonio, he set out to bring Antonio Gara in. Things, because he didn't like this man speaking on his behalf. He wanted to make his own relationship with the Americans. He did not want war. So Juan Antonio sent a message to Antonio Gara to meet over at the village of Tuva, which was near Juan Razon's place out in Anza Borrego Desert. So he went over there. Antonio Gara did, and then early in the morning, Juan Antonio came up behind him and caught him and 4 others of his men, and took him captive and brought him back to San Timoteo Canyon, where Juan Antonio's village was at. And then he released him to Juan Antonio released Antonio Gara to General Bean. And so Oliver Wozencraft, he told all these people, all the indigenous people, we're going to make a treaty over in Temecula. I want you guys to get to the village of Temecula. And so they went. And so, that was on Christmas Day. And on Christmas Day, he left Coyote Canyon. He burned every single village that he came across. And there was 5 of them. He burned them all to the ground. He told all the people to come to the village here, and we're going to sign a treaty with the United States government, and things are supposed to be all hunky-dory. So this is where they came into. If you see on this map, you see those pink dots, that's following the old immigrant trail. So it's coming from the east, going to the west, and it's, this is on the old trail. And there's right next to the village there of Temecula, there you have the adobe of Pablo Apish, and he's there at the village. Here's an early plot map with Pablo Apish, his adobe that's right here. And you can see the old river, the Temecula Creek line right here. And the immigrant trail comes from the east over here, comes down right in front of the Apish adobe, goes on out through Temecula on north to Los Angeles. And Pablo Apish, he was Luiseño, and he had been to the mission San Luis Rey, and he was granted this allotment right here, or not allotment, but this ranch. So there's a large section of land, and he was the owner. And so when Oliver Wozencraft came in, he was looking for a good place where he could conduct a treaty council. So he stayed inside the Upper Adobe. And this is an area over here. You have the wolf store over here. And in this area over here, this general area was the opposite adobe. Pichanga's over this way, down at the south end of this picture right here. And you know, this is just another picture. But so the treaty, and it was in January, and there was, and in the notes it talks about how there was snow on all the mountain peaks. It was beautiful. And so the treaty itself, the Luiseños were the first to get there, and then over a couple of days, the Luiseños all the way from Mission San Luis Rey, from the Pacific Ocean, they were there, but no one else had showed up. Some of the Cupeños had shown up, but the majority of the people, which were the Cahuilla people and Serranos, they had not shown up. They were under the guidance of Juan Antonio, and Juan Antonio had not shown up yet. And he was intimidated to go. He did not believe that he should go, and he had just signed a treaty with Lieutenant Bean after turning over Antonio Gara to Bean. And so he felt he didn't need to sign another treaty. But Oliver Wozencraft sent soldiers to bring in Antonio Gara, Juan Antonio, and the rest of his men. And so they assembled at the opposite adobe. And but once Juan Antonio came in, that's when supposed negotiations began. So, you know, I find this real interesting. Do you think there was negotiations? Was there anyone that could speak Cahuilla, Cupeño, Serrano, Payon-Cahuicham, speak these 4 languages? And so for one, the treaties were already pre-written. So you see this blue paper that's right here? That's part of the original treaties, and it was written on blue federal paper right here. And they had to get the top dog to sign it, and that was Juan Antonio. It took days for Juan Antonio to come in, but he finally came in. But you know, that they had to translate from English to Spanish, and then from Spanish they had to translate into these 4 other native languages, and not everything was translated correctly. When it spoke about, you know, from other treaties, there was other real specific information that was written down, and the people that were writing down were saying that a lot of information was left out. It was not translated word for word. And so what was translated was that you're going to give up all of this land, and we're going to protect you. We're going to take care of you. But they didn't really understand, the indigenous people, because it was not translated to them, that they were losing all of this land. They were just going to lose it, and that they had no more voice in it. They could no longer be with their ancestors. They could no gather and hunt wherever they wanted to, and that they were supposed to give up authority. And why did the people even come? hundreds of people came, indigenous people came. One, it wasn't because they wanted to, but no, there was a massacre in Coyote Canyon. How did Juan Antonio come in? He was brought under threat. The soldiers had to go bring him in. So this was a military parade. It was all planned and brought in. The indigenous people did not want to sign at first. They did not want to sign the treaty. And the treaty commissioner, Oliver Wozencraft, sat the people down, and as the people explained, were translated from English to Spanish into Cahuilla, Serrano, Cupeño, Luceño. You know, the people heard it, and then they were able to talk about it amongst themselves for it was like for a day and a half that they had. But they held ceremony, they held prayer, and you know, they had they went inside their Kishumnuet, inside the big house, and they had prayed on it, and they had come to learn that they wanted a better life for their children. They wanted something better. They didn't want to be killed. They wanted to be guidance. They wanted to mandate their direction. So they agreed to sign. So at the very top, you see Juan Cahuilla, or here on this one, this is Juan Cahuilla of Paulsawish. And this is the man from Agua Caliente, where I am from. Genio of Huanapiapa, that's in Whitewater. This one up here, Jose Cuspa Umnuit. This is Cabazon, Chief Cabazon. He signed it. And then above him is Juan Antonio. On the right over here, we see Jose Noca Changalangish and Jose Ignacio. These two men, Jose Naka Changalangish, he's from Cupa. Jose Ignacio, he was Cupeño as well. This Geronimo down here, this is the one Serrano from he signed it. And then above here, there's where the Payancowicham people signed it. And we have Oliver Wozencraft signing it, and several others. The treaty was signed on January 5th, 1852. 2 days later, they went to San Isabel. They rode. Some rode on horses, some walked. And they made another treaty with the Kumeyaay people on January 7th, 1852. And for this Treaty of San Isabel, it was made just south of this church, out in the field. This is the field right here. It was made out in the field. So here are the two treaties and all of their land that we see right here. And so this is it. These were supposed to be the proposed reservations that they were going to get. So in the treaty itself, one of the things was that they acknowledged the United States as the superior government in the county, and that they would conform to the United States and not revolt against the United States. And that there was another thing, that they agreed to cede all of their lands. There was one of the articles that said that they would receive farming implements, they would receive education. I want to say, and we need to move on, but not everyone was invited. At the Oasis of Mara up near Joshua Tree, this is the oasis here with the Mike family here in the center. They were not all invited to the treaty. This was only included the Cahuilla people, the Serrano, Cupeño, and the Luceño people. And we're talking about Puha and Iva'a. That's natural power that the land has, that the water has, and that we're over here, this picture on the right, we're singing to that power. So in July, well, in February, those treaties were sent to the Washington, D.C. On July 8th, the United States Senate voted not to approve those treaties that were created in California. Of the 18 treaties, not one of the treaties was approved. Not one was just approved by the United States Senate. So that means none of the land was ever ceded to the United States, and it would still belong to the tribal people. A lot of people, indigenous people, see the treaty as toilet paper because it was just all lies, and they felt they were lied to. So they don't have anything that they can say to the United States government that says reapprove of what you're doing. So what I'm talking about deceit, this is everything for the tribes right here. They created a treaty, they signed with their own hands this treaty, and the treaty was not approved, and the United States Senate never told the tribes about it at all. And so because there was no approval, it didn't matter, everyone kept settling on indigenous land anyway. These maps here were approved in the 1890s. So you see down on the left, right here, you see where this yellow and the pink is? So the pink is what the new proposed reservation would be. So the indigenous people were giving up all this land that was in the yellow, and this was supposed to be the new land right here in the pink. For the Kumeyaay people, all the land that they were giving up was all here in the blue, and then the proposed reservation was in the orange. Here's a better picture right here. So again, the yellow is everything that the tribes were giving up, and for this pink, this is what the tribes were to receive in perpetuity. But it wasn't until 1875 through 1891 where reservations were established in Southern California. And it's just a small fraction of what the tribes had, and not all the tribes, not every community received, was entitled to a reservation. There were many tribes, many tribal communities that were left out. And it seems odd, but what the United States is doing is, they're looking at tribes that might have signed the actual Treaty of Temecula, and if they signed it, they potentially might be able to have a reservation, but that's not the case. There are several tribes out there that did sign, and they're not able to get a reservation. And the government, United States government, keeps putting down its says one thing right after the other to not legitimize the tribal people's wishes and for a reservation. And it's not really for a reservation, but we want something for our families, for our children. It's our birthright. This is the land that our grandmothers have taken care of, and the United States should not dictate whose land it is. And so the lands that we received are just a very, very small number that you can see right here. 265,000 acres out of the state of California. which is millions and millions of acres. This is all the tribes got back. And it was in 1905. So in 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt came out to California, and he wanted to came into Riverside, and that's when he heard about these treaties that had been created in 1852, and it's now 1903, and he's going, well, where are those treaties? What happened to them? And he learns that something happened, that they were rejected. So he goes looking for them. He gets back to Washington. He starts looking for them, and it was in 1905 that those treaties appeared, and they had been stashed and hidden out from the public view. But you can see these maps that were made in the 1890s under the Royce. You know, they had access to these treaties because of these maps that you see right here. These great maps that tell you where the treaties were at, what land was supposed to be ceded, what land was not ceded. But if you read the minutes to the United States Senate and Congress, if you follow it, because they're not super detailed, but there are some notes but it did go into a secret session, and the United States Senate voted not to approve any of the treaties because they felt the land was too valuable to give to the native people. The land that there was a lot of other people coming into California. California was on a boom because of the gold rush, and it was white dominant society that wanted to control the land. And so the indigenous people were left out from the very beginning. So you can see this map here on the left. This is all indigenous land, but there's just fragments of tribal reservations, tribal lands now. Indigenous families suffered loss of land, leading to historic trauma, generational trauma, loss of language, loss of spiritual and natural connections to the land, loss of identity, loss of songs, loss of lives, and in some cases, their spirit. A lot of Native people are still suffering and carry a tremendous amount of hurt and heartache and anger inside because of the treaties and what's happened to their families for generations now. This here is a picture of Hahopin. That was the Kumeyaay word. For Warner Springs, the Cahuilla word is Kupa, and that's how it's pretty much remembered as now. But the indigenous people were returning to our lands. We're reclaiming the lands. We're reclaiming our language, our songs, our identity. And we go to the ocean, to the rivers, to the springs to pray and to sing. And when I say we have an obligation to care for those water bodies, to care for the land itself, that's what we were instructed to at the very beginning of time by our Creator, to care for one another. And the hot springs, the mineral springs, the ocean, they're all healing. It's medicine, and all that water nurtured us. It took care of us. Have you ever, say, gone to the ocean or to the river, and just hearing that sound, you go, oh yeah, I'm finally here. And you just get excited just because you can hear the water flowing in the river, or you can hear the water coming up onto the shore and breaking. But then you sit down in that water and you get this tingling in your body, and it comes like from your feet all the way up to your torso, and to your head and to your limbs. And those water molecules are realigning the ions in your body, and your body is starting to beat at a lower frequency. And so it's that lower frequency that slows your body down and it enables you to breathe softly and not so rapid, and it opens up your pores and your mind, so you're able to think more clearly and take everything in. And so when we're talking about these springs and the healing, that's the healing that we're talking about. Agua, Namachume. It's all done. So if there's any questions from you guys, Sherry, you're gonna let me know, right?
Okay, this is Rebecca, and I'm marked as Sherry because I had to use her login.
Yes.
Hi.
All right. Well, I'm gonna stop sharing.
Okay, and I had asked everybody to put their questions in chat, and I'm not seeing very many questions here.
Well,
Sean,
I
are
see
you
3
able
right
to?
now.
Okay.
So when we're talking about the staple foods, what were the 4 staple foods? And this is for the 4 staple foods. This is for all the people in Southern California. So we have the agave. There's the pinyon, the pinyon nut, and then there's the oak, which is the acorns, and the other one is mesquite, the mesquite bean. So depending on your geographic area, you might have 1 to 4 of those. But these are all staple foods. And these are, when I mean by staple, that this was, of all the food that you were consuming, this was more than 50% of it right here. This is where it came from. So these foods were extremely, they provided a lot of energy and protein, and they were highly protected and managed by the indigenous people themselves. And let's see, Peter is asking, after the time of the US invasion, was life and history of the Kumeyaay in Mexico different from those in the US? That's a really good question, Peter. Do I want to say life was different? From what I know, from going down into Mexico to some and visiting with the people down there and talking with the people up here, life was very different. And we know that today that the Kumeyaay people, you know, we're really split with the when the United States border came in. And so you had Kumeyaay down in Mexico, you had Kumeyaay in the United States, but before that border, well, there was no border. And so they could move freely from area to area. So what had happened when that border came put in, it stopped the movement of the people from moving back and forth. It stopped the sharing of stories and songs, language, food. But here in the United States, it seemed like there was less and less access to traditional areas, and the people were not here in the United States allowed to practice ceremonies. They were not allowed to speak their own language. Whereas in Mexico, the people still practice their ceremonies. They practice their language, and sometimes they, a lot of times they were still more remote, but they were allowed to practice their language and their songs. And so there is a big difference. The Pai Pai down in the south and the Ipai in the north. Good question, Peter. I see you're nodding your head. All right. So 100, Rebecca points out it's been 170 years ago this month. Wow, since the Treaty of Temecula, 1852, 170 years. That's incredible, y'all. 170 years. And it's really not that long ago. I mean, how many generations is that? I mean, if you're looking at, 20-year generations, that's what, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 generations right there. That's incredible. And our people today, we are a lot, we're really strong today. And but we have lost a lot, but there is so much hope. And we're being taught today in our ceremonies and our tribal governments to hold on to our stories and songs. It's never too late. It's never too late. And the identity of being federally recognized, state recognized, and indigenous. Being indigenous, it really comes from right here. It doesn't matter if the government recognizes you, if the state recognizes you, but it's from right here. That's hard. That's hard for some people though, because there's a lot of tribal communities that are not recognized, and I feel for them, but I support them. There's a question from Eric. Is your thesis published, available for purchase, or is it cataloged at UCR? Well, I'm trying to make, I want to get it published. So I'm working on that. But at this time right now, it's available through ProQuest. So if you look at ProQuest on dissertations from University of California Riverside, you can find it. The Treaty of Temecula by Sean Milanovich. Okay. How is the situation now? The history is fascinating. I am new to this area. When you're talking about history, there's a lot of people that don't know the history. So as in the beginning, I had asked one of our tribal elders about the Treaty of Temecula, because I never found out about the treaty until I went to UCR. And when I asked this one elder, did our people sign the Treaty of Temecula? And the elder said, no, that we never signed any treaties with the United States government. As a matter of fact, Sean, those treaties were signed in the West, in the Midwest, but none of the tribes in California signed treaties. So not everyone knows the history. That doesn't mean it's gone. And as I see it, certain families, have retained certain things, but if we all work together, we have our history, we have our stories, we have our songs. The history though, is when you go to our gatherings of any type, whether it's for a wake, maybe we're out on the landscape and we're gathering agave, which we're going to be gathering pretty soon in 2 months, or maybe it's a tribal meeting history is always spoken about, and we're always acknowledging our elders and those that came before us. We're very humble people. And we don't forget the people that have helped us, but at the same time, you know, we're just a small part on the wheel. You know, we're just one spoke on the wheel, and we have to work collectively together if we're going to take care of our earth, of our landscape. And we have to learn to love one another. We have to learn to share our stories. And so, you know, I commend the Temecula Valley Historical Society for putting this on, because I think it's important that we share some of this history, because this history is not known by many tribal groups, nor the American government really remembers these stories. The people don't know, and so we have to tell the story. So to be able to tell the story from a Native perspective is needed immensely. And here's Eric from Pachanga, also a UCR history alumni. All right. I have a painting of the signing of the treaty I think you'd love to see. I sure would. I want to have to hit you up, Eric. I'm going to. Let's see. Let me get rid of this right here. Then there's, all right, Carlos. He says, Achima, heartfelt gratitude. Thanks for sharing this history leading to the treaty and pointing out the losses which are still being felt and dealt with today in social, emotional, physical, and spiritual context. So like I said, that historic trauma is heartfelt, and we're still suffering from the effects today. All the things that we went through, the genocide, being forced to move from our lands, being forced not to be able to sing our songs, being forced not to have ceremony, being forced to eat traditional foods, non-traditional foods, being forced to accept another government and give up everything that we had known to do it this way. We were forced to learn to follow a different religion. All of these things were new to us, but readopted. We did not want to die, and we wanted to be able to move forward in a good way. And so readopted until it became our own. Let's see. Do you guys have any more questions?
Anyone with more questions, feel free to unmute and speak directly to Sean.
Okay. Sean, what made you decide on Treaty of Temecula for your thesis rather than something else or some other treaty?
I chose the Treaty of Temecula because it was political, and because I don't think I'm real political. But I wanted to try something new, something that would challenge me. And even though I love history, I love culture and language, and originally that's what I was going to do. I was going to write the dissertation on all of our native plants in the Cahuilla language. That was my idea. But I wanted something more challenging, which was the Treaty of Temecula, because I didn't know anything about it. And I know a little bit of Cahuilla, but to be able to write a dissertation in Cahuilla, I think would have been pretty tough. But for this context, because nobody knew anything about the treaty. I did not know about it. I asked my dad, he knew about it. But yet he never shared anything about it. And so the more I kept researching on it, I just thought how terrible it was. And nobody knows about this treaty. And yet all of California is all stolen land. It's all stolen land. None of the land in California was released to the American people at all. This is indigenous land. And so for the American government to make all these laws on our land is BS. It's not valid. The land should be given back to the indigenous people. And so this is a horrific atrocity that has happened and has been legitimized by the United States government. And it was a couple of years ago where Governor Gavin Newsom, in a public ceremony, he told the indigenous people he apologized, on behalf of California, what had happened to the indigenous people. That was the first apology that we had ever received from a government institution. And to make relationships like that is great. That's it in the right direction. We still have a long ways to go, but the problems that some of the people are facing today, the mental problems, behavioral health problems, the unable to speak your language, and not being able to have access to go gather foods that you want to gather, even today, because it's on someone else's fence line on the other side of the fence and you're not able to cross there, but yet those are your traditional lands. We need to make relationships with one another so we can have access to these lands, so we can help support one another and learn from one another. We all have a purpose here on Earth. And I don't know what that purpose is, but I do know for me that I really like learning and sharing information. And so I hope I can continue to learn from you all, from the archives, from my elders, from my relatives, and disseminate that information to help make better judgments, better calls from everyone, all the way around.
Sean, this is Dick Fox. We certainly appreciate the heartfelt presentation, and very, very thorough. And any more questions from anyone that anybody at all? On behalf of the Historic Society, I certainly want to.
Okay.
There is a question. Peter Poole has one.
So a very odd thing in the time that I've been in here in Temecula, the Pechanga tribe has been able to pick up a few hundred acres of land that they actually purchased. And, compared to what happened, I mean, this is nothing, but it's something. And they actually protected some sacred land that was going to be developed with a quarry. And so I wonder if there's, any possibilities, anything that you know about where, some kind of partnerships or something where lands that, were part of the indigenous, the people's land can come under, can come back under the care of the tribes at all.
Good question, Peter. So there is I also work with the Native American Land Conservancy, and our home base is here in the Coachella Valley, and we try to we find lands that are special, are sacred, and were occupied by our indigenous relatives, and we acquire those lands to manage, protect, and continue ceremony, and to teach our community members how important these sites are. So it's a way to continue to transmit that knowledge, that sacred knowledge. And so we bring people out. When I say community members, a lot of the times it's the youth, but it can be our neighbors. It can be people in government offices such as the Bureau of Land Management. It could be, we've met with Sally Jewell when she was secretary, and out in our, out near the village of Guanapiapa, in, at the west entrance of the Coachella Valley. But like, so we acquired some land a couple of years ago from, it borders Joshua Tree National Park, and it's only 33 acres, 33 acres, that's it. But we had worked something out with San Bernardino flood control, and it's part of this canyon, Coyote Hole, that has a lot of cultural resources, lots of rock art. And but that land was given back to us to manage, to take care of. And so that's great. And so then we bring our tribal community members and other members out to the site. We teach them about the site, the history, teach them about the plants and the animals, the geology. And, so this is just one step forward. So you remember it was a couple months ago, it was last year at this time, almost near this time, when Palm Springs, at the mouth of Chino Canyon, there was a big sign that said Indian land. And it was for the Desert X series. And it was really to bring about indigenous awareness on the land. And it was brought about to create, we want people to start talking. So it was this huge sign. It was tall as the Hollywood signs in Hollywood, but it said Indian land. But yet we know it's Cahuilla land, specifically Agua Caliente, Saki. But it was sparked. It was built this way, constructed to create conversation, and also to spark land back initiatives for the people to start thinking about returning land back to the indigenous tribes. I have not heard about really any land going back to the tribes themselves. Tribes are being asked, well, if you want this piece of land, you got to pay for it. And, millions of dollars, a lot of money. I was thinking one, for like Warner Springs, because that's where my grandma is from, Rufina Wellness, and that hike out of there in the early 1900s, she had to walk out of there. She was 5 years old. So I still remember that, but for the tribe to have to buy that land back at such an outrageous price is unbelievable. So we do have a long ways to go yet. A long ways.
Oh, Sean, it's Dick Fox again. We're approaching 2 hours, certainly.
Woo!
Very thorough, very educational, and certainly heartfelt from your standpoint. I've been intrigued by the image behind you. Is that a photo, or is that you're not actually out in the sunlight in the desert as we speak? So I'm curious about the image behind you.
So this image behind me, this is in the Anza Borrego Desert. This is Coyote Canyon. And this is where the Cahuilla people live.
Is that a big picture?
This picture, well, it's a valley. It's just a picture of a valley that I took with my phone, but that's agave behind me. And this is a huge valley. It's in some places, it's like 4 or 5 miles across. And so what you're seeing is out here is miles and miles of agave flats. And out there in the middle of those flats, so the agave, before it sends up those stalks, is when you want to pick it, when you want to harvest it. So you want to dig down to where the root is and get it below where the root is. So you want to eat the heart because that's the best part, but you have to roast it. And so the people would roast it in a rock lined pit. And so out here in these agave stands, there's lots of roasting pits behind me where they would throw in lots of agave and roast it in the ground for a couple of days. And at Agua Caliente, we go out and gather every year the agave in March, at the end of March. Sometimes it's in April. It really depends on the climate, on how much rain we received, Dick. And so if you ever want to come out to see some of that, be a part of it, let me know. And be my personal guest, and I'll show you, and you can taste it. You can go out and even gather it with us, but definitely taste it if you want and see how it's all done. See the roasting pit. It's a lot of work.
Okay. Well,
Yes.
thank you very much for your time and your presentation, and very thorough, and almost like we completed a 3-unit course. So
Woo! I know it was a bunch of information I unloaded on you all, but glad you're all charged up, ready to go.
yeah, very good. Well, thank you. Very good. Thank you, Sean.
Aloha.
Appreciate your
you.
time. All right.
Well, blessings. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye, Pantheon.
Good night. Well, Sean.